So it now gives me great pleasure to hand the meeting over to Yale's S from Texas, who will be sharing around 50 minutes on the topic what big book recovery looks like. Yale, thank you very much.
Thank you, Chanel. Maybe not great pleasure, but just moderate pleasure. First of all, let me say thank you to everybody that's here, the people that have, come from other meetings. It's great to see these faces, including the great Tim C., a man who I've got ultimate respect for his program. And now I have to tighten up whatever I'm going to say. So this is good. Um, Seriously, now the most important thing I can do for this discussion is a list of disclaimers. First of all, these are my opinions. They are not in any way endorsing AA or any alternative way of doing this, even though I try to follow what's euphemistically referred to as a big book program. I'm going to get into what that means, but no one is required to do anything that they don't feel compelled to by their higher power and by their sponsor and by the way they're being directed. So I have no prior hold on any of this stuff. So please feel free to call me wrong. As a matter of fact, everybody's got the absolute right to be absolutely wrong. And that's one of the greatest freedoms in AA. That and the sentence that we learned that no is a complete sentence. So the topic is, what big book recovery looks like. And automatically it can be pejorative. And a lot of people have, felt offense that there is somehow another way of doing this that infringes on their way of doing things, which I don't think is true at all. I think that we all come to the conclusion of what we're supposed to do, what works for us, and I'm going to try to break this down on what works for me. First of all, I'd like to say that I'm incredibly grateful. I'm incredibly lucky to be an alcoholic and to have found this way of living. I couldn't be more grateful to all the things that have come before. And you'll hear some of the story and some of the things that we overcome and we go, man, this just couldn't be any better. I've been sober since the last day of 1992. And for like all of us, it's probably a miracle. When you really think about what your life was like on the day or two before you came in, what you were going through, it was just hopeless and helpless. And just, I was a complete and utter mess. And like most of us, truly, my best friend in the world was alcohol. When I thought about giving it up for good and all, it was horrifying. In that pit of your stomach, it was like, how do people do this? You'd hear people talk about, having, a year, clean and sober. And I'd be going, they're lying. That's nobody should want to do that, much less attempt it. But, when you find yourself down in that hole and you are not, provided with any real alternative, and the book has a lot to say about that, then you end up taking it one day at a time and slowly you start to see things. I was going to meetings in, well, I'm from Atlanta, Georgia originally, and was going to meetings there for about a month or two. And I had the startling revelation that I had nothing in common with anybody in those rooms because I thought I was crazy, not alcoholic, because I thought it was preferable to be to be crazy than it was to be an alcoholic. So, but suddenly, after months of this, I started hearing the similarities, and that was part of the preamble or the opening discussion, and not hearing the differences. And all of a sudden, I realized that I could relate to everybody. And then it went, it went just fine. I had a sponsor. We worked the steps, which I look back on it now, and I can't really say we worked the steps the way I know them, but we did the best we could. And then I took off on sponsoring people who, for better or worse, knew less than I did. And so This was 32 years ago, and I still pray for those people every week. Inadvertently, I didn't kill anybody by just passing on what I was being told. You know, don't drink, go to meetings, 90 and 90, even if your rear end falls off, just don't drink. And more power to them. There are lots of ways of finding your higher power. There are lots of ways of staying sober in this world. I do not mean to imply, once again, another caveat, that this is the only way. It's just the way that works for me. And by the way, something very important on page 164, it says, our book is meant to be suggestive only. We realize we know only a little, and God will constantly disclose more to you and to us. So there you go. You have it on good authority. So I went I drifted away after a while. After sponsoring a bunch of people, I had to move back to Texas for business and pretty, like a lot of people, I went to some meetings. They weren't the same. The people weren't the same. I didn't have any friendships. So I drifted away. And by the way, if you ever hear anybody uttering this phrase, run, because it's very likely lightning is going to hit somebody in the vicinity. I no longer have to work the program because I'm living it. Well, that is one of the goofiest things people can say, in my opinion. And I remember uttering that quite a bit. And I was 22 years dry and just a, terrible unrecovered alcoholic and at the point of being suicidal. I mean, I thought this was all there was. This was all about not drinking. And if it was, this just wasn't really a reasonable trade for me. So I was at this party. I don't know why I'm gonna tell this story, but hopefully it'll make somebody smile. I was at this party and this woman came up with a tray of drinks and she said, would you like one? And I went, no, I don't drink. She goes, neither do I. And she was this unusual sort of person. She was hopping up and down on her feet. And I said, well, hello, my name's Yale. And she goes, well, my name's Cricket. And I said, well, that's great. Why do they call you Cricket? She said, because I hop around all the time here in yoga or something. And I'm going, well, how long have you been doing yoga? And she goes, oh, about a month. So here's some woman who's adopted a nickname named Cricket, who's been practicing this thing for a month. But she went on to explain to me why she had found this way of staying sober, and it was through this group called the Primary Purpose Group in Dallas. And so, when you're at the end of your rope and you have very limited alternatives, it was compelling for me to go sort it out. And I figured, I'd show up. I figured with 22 years, at least they weren't going to kick me out and, cuss my name. But I walked in and I was humiliated after about 20 or 30 minutes. There were kids running around with, 5, 6 months of sobriety that knew things that I'd never even heard of. And they had this secret and they had hidden this secret from me. And I'm going, how in the world could this be possible? And they said, yeah, they put it in the last place that you would probably ever look. It's in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. And then I was completely taken back, but intrigued. So we kept going. I got a sponsor, great guy. A lot of people know him. By the way, he's doing fine. He was in that Texas flood yesterday and was really helpful in trying to save people. But what a horrible, horrible situation for those of you who don't know. But anyway, so we worked the steps in an entirely different form and fashion. And all of a sudden, things in my life started changing. And I didn't believe it was possible. I couldn't believe it. But it seems to me like AA is broken down into two different phases. First phase is all about steps 1 through 9 and not drinking. What it says is that, step one is we admitted we were powerless over alcohol and that our lives had become unmanageable. Well, that's the two-part disease, the physical allergy and the mental obsession. And to really understand that is the beginning, to incorporate it, to be able to admit to ourselves that beyond a shadow of a doubt, that's us. We are what the book refers to as chronically alcoholic. Sometimes they say real alcoholic, but chronic. And there are several, they go on to say that there are, on page 20, that there are different types of drinkers. There's a moderate drinker. Take it or leave it. We all know people who can do it, take a drink or two and go, no, I'm feeling it. No need to make funny comments here. It exists. Then there's the hard drinker who, for all intents and purposes, looks like a chronic alcoholic. They can have all the same problems, legal, mental, physical. They can die early. They can be incarcerated. They can have all these terrible things happen to them. But in the end of the day, they still have the power, either through, treatment or therapy or something, to stop drinking for good and all. Then there's the type they call the chronic, which is people that have gone beyond human aid. And those are the people that I think Bill Wilson and the rest of the 100 were trying to define when they wrote the book. And that is somebody that has to find a different way. Now, once again, I'm going to keep throwing this out there so there are no hate daggers coming at me that there are lots of different ways, lots of different types of meetings, and we can all find our own and do quite well with it. No, no intended slight here. But for me, I decided then and there that I was chronic because I had the mind of a chronic alcoholic. And what they say in the doctor's opinion was, restless, irritable, and discontent when I can no longer find the ease and the comfort which comes from taking a drink. Now, the bad news is they go on to say that this can occur within a week to a month of being separated from alcohol. So, with that, and all the people that I work with, I am, guilty of moving fairly quickly. I try to get everybody through in about 2 weeks with everything. Obviously, you don't complete all your amends, your night step amends in the first 2 weeks, but if you start them, then you can get off on 10, 11, and 12. And I've always viewed, and this is going to be a big part of the discussion, 10, 11, 12 as really the heart of recovery. Because as it says, I think everybody remembers Jim's story. He was the car dealer that mixed a little whiskey and milk, thinking that a milk punch wouldn't hurt him at all. But it turns out that AA went to see him in the hospital and he said, "Hey, thanks for coming. Appreciate it, but I'm not as bad as you guys. See you down the boulevard." And then it said all went well for a while, but Jim failed to go to enough AA meetings. No, it didn't say that. It said he failed to have a spiritual awakening. No, it didn't say that. It says that he failed to enlarge his spiritual life. And that's the secret to this. And that's what it says. A spiritual awakening will get you sober, but a spiritual awakening will not keep you sober. If that was the case, no, it's easy for you to say, nobody would ever relapse that either been in the clergy or had had these spiritual awakenings. So that's an important consideration. We have to carry this way of life, into action on a daily basis, and we'll get to that in a minute. So, having said that, um, step one is critical because if you do not believe that you have a progressive, relapsing mental disorder that's going to lead you ultimately to your death or horrible consequences, most of us will never accept the solution in step two, which is we came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. Now, I tend to use the term God just for convenience, but please don't, take that as to mean anything specific. I'm really try to separate people's religion from the spirituality of the program, meaning that people are free to practice any way that they feel fit. And I think that's great. But I think it's critical that we realize that we have a special purpose. And we'll get into that in a minute. And I've seen a lot of people that have gone off of the 12 step recovery and gone into more of a religion step. And I've never seen it work well for chronic alcoholics because they seem to forget the fact that their primary purpose is to try to carry this message to other alcoholics and to practice these principles in all their affairs. We'll get to that. So, the problem with the second step is that when we say that we are powerless over alcohol, that's our dilemma. Alcohol itself's not a problem. If you had power over it, no problem. But, being powerless, by definition, I have to find a power greater than myself, which, as it says, can restore me to sanity. And the real problematic portion of that is that the root of the problem is selfishness and self-centeredness. Most of us first reaction is, well, I'm not selfish. I just shared something the other day. It really goes beyond that. It goes to a life view. If everything that comes into my purview gets, filtered by how does it impact me, then I am still, belly button gazing, and I will never be satisfied, because what the book promises us is to be happy, joyous, and free. And, my definition of that is when I believe beyond a shadow of a doubt that a higher power has got this, that this makes sense, there's a plan and a purpose, and that, I just have to stay focused on what my primary purpose is, and everything else will get moved right along. Step three gets down to, we made a decision. And for all intents and purposes in my world, that really means that we're agreeing to work the rest of the steps. It means that this is going to be a lifelong proposition and that all kinds of amazing things are going to occur because, as the book says, our higher power is going to take us from being selfish and self-centered to other centered and eventually to higher power centered. And that's where everything changes. So we go from the first phase, which is this whole concept of not drinking, which is incredibly important. Clearly, nothing can be done until you get there. But the last lines of step nine are, we've entered the world of the spirit. Our next step is to grow in understanding and effectiveness. That means an awful lot because to me, AA is like this huge funnel. You can come in with any kind of belief system you want. It does not matter. And we've all heard people pick higher powers that are, comical or just crazy. Nobody that I've ever met that stayed sober for any length of time still had those wacky views of a higher power years later. Somehow it just gets changed. And what happens is we enter the big part of the funnel and then we go through a narrow part. And there's the chapter in the book that says there is a solution. And they're very specific about it. We follow the simple step-by-step instructions as laid out in the big book. For higher power's sake, they sent the book out, for years to people without, having a group to really mentor them. And they were able to take those simple instructions and get clean and sober and form groups around them, which is pretty amazing when you think about it. So that's the first part. Then the funnel opens up, and that's we've entered the world of the spirit. Now, what does that mean? Well, to me, and here again, nobody else is forced to believe this. To me, it means that we have now started to have a relationship with our higher power, and we are starting to get directed on our own course. And that's a miracle when you think about it, because I'm sure I'm the only one, but when I came to this party, I had just a little bit of shame, guilt, and remorse for some of the things that I did. And and from that, I was going, I have really messed this up. Every potential, benefit, whatever I had, I have completely messed up and burned this puppy to the ground. But what I've come to believe is that everything is perfect the way it is right here, right now, because every one of those things that were horrible were actually special training that I got for my primary purpose, which is that now that I work with other alcoholics, I'm able to share with them some of the stuff that happened to me. And invariably, people relate to it and you go, oh my gosh, if I hadn't gone through that, that there'd be no connection. And that connection is what the primary purpose is all about. So instead of seeing this as mess ups or whatever it would be, I now see it now is something that was from God. As a matter of fact, I'm jumping around here, but in my morning prayer, God, thank you for this day and your presence. Please, relieve me of the bondage of self that I may better do your will. Keep me free from self-pity, dishonest, and self-seeking motives. And here's the good part that God, I know that you're going to put something in my path today that's really going to pee me off. And when I find it, I'm not going to blame the person, place, or thing as a random circumstance. I'm going to see it as something from you so I can practice some of the kindness, forgiveness, all the things that the big book and the program have taught me. And it really does change your way. I know you'll find this hard to believe that I have any kind of personal picadillos that impact me during my life, but somehow I find people in cars to be particularly vexing. I just don't think that they should be assassins. And for those of you who ever have the misfortune of driving in Houston, Texas, you'll know what I mean. Those people are trained killers. Be very careful in your car in Houston, Texas. I got rear-ended by an uninsured motorist a while back, and I still get to see the bumper hanging off and going, God, I can't believe it. But the point is that I have learned now the hard way. I would look at people in car and I go, how can you be so stupid? What are you doing? And then I find myself doing something equally as crazy shortly thereafter. Well, now I look at it like, well, my job is to be that guy on the road who's looking out for everybody. Come on in, I'll break, whatever. It's all good. And I don't think I've terrified anybody in several days, but I'm getting better at it. And but that's the thing. And I started, this was an interesting concept for me also. I used to look not at the car in front of me, but the car in front of them. And I was constantly judging the car in front of me by how they were doing. And I was braking, based upon all this. And I realized that's crazy. That's not my job. My job is to deal with what's in front of me, which God put there. So now I'm doing it a little bit differently and it's getting a little bit better. Apologize for that digression. So then we get into steps 4 through 9. 1 through 3 are obviously the preparation steps, but they're critical because if you don't understand and have embraced and absorbed step 1, you'll never go for the rest of it. Most people, 4 and 5 are somewhat, worrisome, if you will. And it's really not that at all. Sometimes I think that we do a disservice to newcomers by making it a bigger deal than it really is. Because I don't believe anyone I have ever met who's coming into the program can do a successful, fearless and searching moral inventory of themselves that first go round, which is fine. I think we're taking this, call it a hard-boiled egg, and we're cracking it. We're getting to see how selfishness and self-centeredness began to impact our relationships with other people. Well, I think it gets cracked through the rest of the program. And I think the biggest undervalued piece of this is through sponsorship when we're doing fifth steps with other people. Here, this far down the range, I am still remembering things that I did, through these fifth steps and having to do 10th steps on them and to be able to, turn it back over and, come to grips with it, making amends when I owe it, and then, resolutely turn my thoughts to other people I can help. And that has been an incredible blessing. So, as I said, the funnel opens up. We've entered the world of the spirit. But what does that really look like? To me, the hardest part in recovery is not even getting clean and sober. It's not staying sober. To me, the single most difficult part is trying to describe to people what this second stage of recovery is like. The thing, when you go back and you read the big book, that's what Bill was talking about. He was talking about the amazing freedom and the happiness and many of us have found utopia here on earth. That's not from just not drinking, because that implies I'm going back to my old way of life just without this big old monkey on my back. And that's not what we get. I don't want my old life back. I'm very, very, very happy with my new life because it's a new way of living in which, this is going to be, polarizing. Call this a thought experiment. Think about this. Wherever you're sitting right now, the lights go out. It's completely dark. And all of a sudden, you hear this big sound, like we'll call it a trumpet or whatever. And you're going, oh my gosh, did I do too much LSD in Vietnam? No, this is something really crazy. And all of a sudden, this light penetrates through the window, and God, as you understand him, shows up and said, uses your name and says, I've been meaning to have a talk with you. And all of a sudden, I mean, what would you do? I mean, other than the fact that I think I was hallucinating, it would be, pretty scary. But what would your next day be like if you were firmly convinced that you had had an experience that there was a higher power? I would imagine for me, I would spend the rest of my days trying to figure out what that meant and how to incorporate it into what I was doing. But, for the time being, I think I would be on the floor on my hands and knees, apologizing for everything I'd ever done, thought, or said. Because there's probably a little room for making amends there. But that's what we say when we believe in a higher power. I don't think many of us get to assimilate this concept of what it means. Page 53 in the book said, when we became alcoholics, crushed by a self imposed crisis, we could not postpone or evade. We had to fearlessly face the proposition that God is either everything or nothing at all. God either is or God is not. What's your choice to be? Now, that sounds pedantic, sophomoric. It sounds like, it deserves a big duh. But the implications of that are pretty provocative. God is or he isn't. And to me, everything comes down to that in my life. He is or he isn't. And if he is, he's got this because there are three, and here again, this is going off script a bit, but there are three fundamental assumptions to me in this equation. Number one is God's real. Number two, God's all powerful. Three, God doesn't make mistakes. And if that's the case, what that means is that everything that happens is God's will. Now, that will doesn't mean that he's happy about it or he planned it. It just means this is what's going to happen because if it wasn't God's will, it wouldn't happen. Now, that solves a lot of issues. Like, over here, you get a lot of political disagreements, but it doesn't matter who's elected in any post. God's choice, not mine. It's an outside issue. I stay focused on what my primary purpose is. So 4 and 5 are cracking that egg, getting us to look at it. 6 and 7 are getting to the point where we are looking at our defects of character. And my experience is most of us have all of them. And then we're turning it over. It's like a garage cleaning. It's not that you're being labeled with new things. It means that, you're saying, okay, take this away. Maybe a little less on the lust and the greed, but still take the rest of them away. That's a joke and nobody's smiling. Oh, shit. Sorry, did I say that? Okay, you get the idea. So, those are important steps in cracking the egg. And then we get to the real star of the show, which is once we start doing our amends, then we can get into 10, 11, and 12. We've now entered the world of the spirit. I am very lucky and blessed that I have a commitment. A commitment's where we go every week to carry the message. And for about the last 11 years, I've been going down to the Salvation Army in Dallas. And, which is sort of a shock to me because I didn't think that I'd have really anything to offer. But this has been incredible. As a matter of fact, I've done this month alone, I've done 9 fifth steps And I think that's bad. I don't recommend anybody do that. I had to take 2 showers yesterday just to try to get the ick off of me, but you get the idea. And with this, you get to see things in an entirely different light through other people's perspectives. And you are all of a sudden bonding with everyone. And there, but by the grace of God, go I. I've heard, this is one of my other expressions. If anybody knows a cannibal, please refer them to me because I need to sponsor a cannibal at some point so I can say I've heard everything. Because today I still have that one missing link. And so, well, anyway, so they don't laugh either when I say it down there. But the point is 10, 11, 12 are overlooked. 10 is critical because 10 is encapsulation of all the steps that came before 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I'm looking all day for selfishness, dishonesty, resentment, fear. And this is the technique that God gave us through the authors of the big book to get us to have insight into what's really going on inside us. And how do you know if you're feeling one of those things? Well, your emotions are out of whack, right? So, if I feel like that, I need to mow somebody down in a car, probably a good time to stop and look. And when I do 4 things in a row, I stop, I pray instantly, and I ask God to remove it. 2, I talk to somebody else immediately, preferably my sponsor. I try to make at least 2 tenth steps personally a week. And I've got 3 people that are all sponsored, my sponsor and 2 other guys that are sponsored by my sponsor because it's my sponsor's hard to reach. But we believe in it wholeheartedly because it's an accountability. It's not so much a confession as it is a reminder that a lot of the things that I tend to think that I am over, I am not over. And there's an old saying in AA that said, no matter how far down the road you go, you're still the same distance from the ditch. And that is a truism. And nobody wants to turn into a bleeding deacon. So 10 is critical. And matter of fact, when we go over to step 11, which is sought through prayer and meditation, improve our conscious contact with God, praying only for knowledge of His will and the power to carry that out, it starts off with the evening prayer. And it said, we thoroughly review our day. Where was I selfish, dishonest, resentful, or fearful? And it changes the tense on 2 of them and it puts resentfulness first. But the point is that the exact same things. So our evening prayer in 11 is we're reviewing our 10 steps. And then it asks us some questions. Did we do everything that we needed to do? Did we talk to everybody? If not, we, make amends with God and we go on about our way because, remorse is not something that we can carry with us and still be helpful to other people. And in the morning, as I already went over the prayer, it's all about, looking at the 24 hours ahead and trying to set a tone for what's going to come up. For me, it's been great to apply that, God, I know you're going to send something today that's going to challenge me, and I will see it as that and an opportunity to get better and not to react to this. And then the star of the show is step 12. Every step is the most important step when you're working it. Looking back, I would just for me suggest that 12 is incredibly important. And when you read the big book again, you can see where Bill is emphasizing it over and over and over. For God's sake, chapter 7, there's a whole chapter on working with others. And with that, I think there are 2 parts. You cannot do step 12 effectively, in my opinion, unless you're doing steps 10 and 11 along with it, because 12 will get you to the end of yourself really quickly. People are difficult to sponsor. Now, I don't know what the success rate is. We hear lots of things in the program, anywhere from 3 to 12% is what I hear most often of us ever make it 5 years. Whatever it is, it's challenging. And you can't, you know, how many people we've all known that have died in the program or trying to get sober or clean is just devastating. One little kid took off, died on my birthday 2 years ago, and somebody I'd worked with for a couple of years picked him up in a treatment facility, went, just the whole thing. And then it was just, it's tragic, but that's God's business. I'm in the doing business. It's like Johnny, I don't know if y'all, there's some sort of parable over here about this guy named Johnny Appleseed who apparently grew really nice apples. And so he took a bunch of seeds and he'd go to his neighbor's yard and he'd throw them around and he'd take off. And so he never got to see the, no pun intended, the fruits of his labor, but never got the pies. But, he would be in the seed throwing business. And that's what I figured that we're in. We are out there tossing it. It's up to God to determine what kind of fruit it produces and when. For me, it may hit them years later that they remember something that was said or the feeling that was invoked inside them, and then they would be able to recall it and hopefully get clean and or get sober anyway. So, and as I said earlier, a critical part for me of 12 is being able to do fifth steps with people. I think that is singularly done as much as anything to get me to the point where I have embraced my selfishness and self-centeredness and how deep it really is. Because as soon as I think that I am, making progress or over it, something will happen that will just shock the fur off of me. Back to this car thing. I'm driving down the road a month or two ago, and this person in a minivan with a dog hanging out of the window and a child in the car, like comes screaming into my lane. Now my window's up. And before I even realized it, some demon was living in my car that jumped inside me and started screaming at my window that what in the world, and I think there were probably some colorful language in there. What in the world was this person thinking? How could they be so, oblivious to what's going on? I was humiliated. I could not believe that this thing got away from me so quick and that it existed. I had to immediately do a 10th step on it, and it stuck with me ever since. And that is that we are always on guard, to be sure that we are preparing ourselves to be of maximum benefit to other people and not yelling at your window, thinking that they're going to get the message. So 12, I think, is critical. And as I said earlier, another thing I think is really undervalued is a commitment. And I know a number of you believe in them. I know a number of you have them, and it's just incredible because a lot of us, have difficulty finding people to sponsor. And, I go to meetings for one particular reason, to be of service to the meeting and to try to translate whatever's being said to the, newcomer. And every meeting I go to is generally a big book study. I've heard enough of the problem side of this. I've enjoyed enough of that myself. I try to stay in the solution because it's just so, supportive and building, and it makes me very, very happy and grateful. Um, I should say this at this point also. Just because you get some time in this thing does not mean you're going to be immune from the vicissitudes of life. About 2 years ago, I was diagnosed with incurable cancer, which wasn't the worst thing to happen to me. About 2 months ago, I had a heart attack called a widowmaker that had a 12% chance of survival. Then the worst part happened. My dog of 6 years died. That was terrible and horrible. And I still, I grieve the loss, but don't, not as painful as it once was. But what does that really mean? It means that I can still be happy, joyous, grateful, and free. And when all this stuff happened, I had no earthly idea what it meant. I'm going, okay, God, there's got to be something here. And it turns out now that I work with a couple of people internationally who I've never met that all are, they're recovered alcoholics, but they also have terminal diagnoses. And I would have zero to offer unless I had gone through that. And that's what I was referring to when I said some of these things that happen that look terrible are actually, special training and benefits in it, that you get to incorporate in your life. I think it was what Marcus Aurelius said, the obstacle becomes the path or the way or something like that. Way over my pay grade, but I'm sure it's really meaningful to some of you. So there you have it. Um, I really don't know what else to say about this. What does the big book way of life look like? For me, it's having worked all the steps. It's working 10, 11, and 12 every day. It's having a sponsor. It's trying to either have a commitment or somewhere where you can go and be in the stream of people that need help, because that's the only way I know of to get beyond, my own self-interest. Um, it means, studying the text. And here again, this is just my approach, what I believe for chronic alcoholics, not for hard drinkers or, moderate drinkers or anybody else, is that if I'm going to be a good sponsor and try to do what the step 12 suggests, I have to have a basis for explaining this. I don't need to give people my opinions on things. If I can't go back and point to something in the book that gives them an anchor, then I feel like I'm doing them a disservice. And so I study this a lot. I do foundation meetings, and for those of you who don't know what that is, it's really a recap of, steps one, two, and three, a little history, and you can find an outline of that on the ppgdallas dot I think org website. And if not, just Google Foundation meeting. There are videos of people doing it, but it's a really good place to start and to understand some of the basics if you feel so compelled. If not, no problem. So with that, I think I'm going to stop blathering on. I appreciate the opportunity, and I'm always available to discuss this stuff. Once again, do it your own way, but this is what's worked for me. Thank you all very much.